Hello, and welcome to Running to Write. I actually forgot to do my little intro thing here, so that's fun, but we are jumping right into it. This is Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. And happy Monday night to everyone here. So thank you, RC Scott, and thank you, Richard, for joining in. I know it's a little bit late for Richard at least, so I don't know. Hopefully you catch it on the replay or something. Anyways, great news outside of Running to Write. On Saturday, October 14th, I will be at an in real person event doing signings with my book. That's right. The Cascades Library in Loudoun County, Virginia is hosting a book signing called Eat Local, Read Local. There'll be food trucks, local food trucks. There'll be 70 plus authors who are local authors. And if you're in the greater DC, Virginia, Maryland area, please stop by and say hi. I hope I get a chance to see some of you all in person if you're around. And it would be nice to see you outside of my computer screen. For those of you in the AuthorTube community who I've seen in person, it's been awesome and fun. But if it doesn't work out, if you don't live close, if you don't want to show up, if it turns out that it's raining, hopefully it won't, knock on wood and everything. I won't hold it against you. It's still fun to, I don't know, come here every week and check out my channel, I guess. I don't know. I'll see you through the computer screens then. But on to tonight's topic. A little over a year ago, I made a video about how to write a reboot, remake, or retelling. I give my favorites and the horrible mistakes, like the reboot of the classic series about the inside of a computer, that being the 3D animated show called Reboot, which is one of the more formative shows that I watched as a child. I've gone on about it and I will absolutely praise it, but they rebooted that show and that is a travesty. Or what they produced was a travesty. I would have loved it if it were good. It's not. It is not worth the time of watching. Less said about that, the better. Anyways, I'm here tonight rebooting this topic as a stellar example has just come out. I'm not quite buried the lead, so the name is also in the title of this episode. Obviously. That is the live action One Piece series on Netflix. Is hands down amazing. I was tentatively hopeful. Everything leading into it made me think that it might actually be good. Particularly one very specific detail is that the creator of the manga, Achiro Oda, retained strict control over what was being produced by Netflix. So everything had to get his seal of approval from the actors and actresses, settings, plot, everything. So that gave me some really high hopes because he still is living in this world and he definitely doesn't want to have it be destroyed as he's bringing it in for its conclusion. And more on that in a little bit because it still is like conclusion is a relative term because we're probably still 5 years out from the end of One Piece and we've been saying that for 10 plus years. Anyways, let's back up a moment and talk about adaptations, also known as reboots, remakes, and retellings. I've read plenty of books that adapt well-known stories and classic fairy tales or shows based on them. Coming up in October, the other series I host, one of them, is on Nia the Vixen of Fiction's channel, and we'll be analyzing the adaptations of Dracula. There are countless instances of those. Many are good. Many are not great. And plenty of them are just all around bad and they aren't even worth watching. So there's so good and amazing, and then there's so bad that it still is good, and then there's just some that are you're better off not watching. Anyways, I'll go into those full breakdown in October. I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say that you will find adaptations everywhere for pretty much any piece of work. Anything that has a great, let's just say, money backing will more often than not get some kind of reboot as soon as whoever controls the money thinks they can make a profit from it, which is a shame. But at the same time, that cycle does create some very incredible stories. So for every Spider-Man, the first 2 movies that came out about it, those were great. Then we had The Amazing Spider-Man, which was not great. And then we had the new MCU Spider-Man, which were the first two movies were really good. Wasn't a big fan of the third, but anyways, what makes a successful reboot or adaptation? I propose they need three things. One, a reason to exist. Two, to be different but not new. And three, to limit the changes that are made from the original or previous adaptations. Now, that one has a lot of wiggle room depending on what you're doing. There are some adaptations that are intentionally stray so far from the original source material that can be largely ignored. But some of these do claim to be a reboot or direct retelling of that story. And if that's what they're going for, if that is their goal to tell the same story or some slight variation of it, then they do need to really limit the changes that are made because of the audience expectations. Before I analyze One Piece and how well it addressed those points, I want to explain what the series is. As I mentioned, One Piece is created by Eiichiro Oda, and it's the adventures of a group of pirates on an oceanic world. There's a lot of tiny islands that are very far spread apart, and really the only way to travel is by seafaring. Well, the only way to travel that most people in the world know of, they're whatever. Let's just say the only way to get around is by boat, and I guess flying like a bird, but most of it's boat travel. There's some balloons, whatever. All about piracy. There are magic fruits that people can eat called devil fruits, and they give whomever eats them special abilities at the cost of being vulnerable to water. And that is a brilliant source of drama because it makes sea battles with devil fruit users become a delicate dance where no one can get wet. Now, again, later on in the series, there are asterisks to that rule, but in general, that's how things start off. And I do really, really like the origins. And as far as the Netflix adaptation is concerned, there's no such thing as hockey yet, even though there were indications of it. But within this world, the most famous and successful pirate is killed. That's sort of the prologue to the story. And as he's about to die, he claims all his treasure is for the taking. He left everything in one piece, hence the name. That starts the new age of the pirates, as each seeks fame, glory, and treasures on the high seas, or some combination of those. And we follow a new pirate named Monkey D. Luffy on his quest to find a ship, crew, and obtain the One Piece to become the king of the pirates. Now, the series itself is very goofy in tone. The main character itself, I would absolutely describe as an idiot, and I do later on as I give more examples. But every single character's backstory is horribly tragic. And some of the things that the characters go through are incredibly dramatic, but they kind of still do it with a smile, or they are always there to support each other. And One Piece tackles specific and incredible themes from prejudice to government suppression to inequality to controlling historical knowledge to maintain power. And a lot of that comes in later on. There are hints of it. And like I said, a lot of characters have some incredibly depressing backstories. But early on, it's relatively tame, especially compared to where they go eventually. So you have one character wants to be a swordsman. He makes a promise with his best friend. His best friend dies, so he now then has to live up to that promise to become the greatest swordsman. There's another character whose pirate dad went off on the high seas, and so he learned to tell lies in the hopes that his father will return. There's a whole bunch of those are like the more lighthearted. I know having a childhood friend die is not lighthearted, but those are the easier to digest backstories. There's a lot of them that go really dark really quickly and basically have multiple children growing up, living terrible lives and being hunted down by the government for the knowledge that they have. But for the most part, this is fairly lighthearted, and the story hits incredible peaks, one of which was included in season 1 of the Netflix show with 2 simple words: help me. So when that gets to that moment, that is one of the earliest inspirational moments and really one of the pieces that get new audience members to sink their teeth in. And I'm going to start off without doing much spoilers, and I'll make a note when I dive into more spoiler territory. I don't plan to give away anything significant short of the slight hints that I just gave. Now, with that, before I dive any further into this oceanic journey, let's check out our chat. So, Just Eva, thank you for chiming in, and I do appreciate the applause. Jordan, let's see. So, how do you make the remake in the region, my friend, like Spider-Man, for an example? How do you make it brilliant? Ooh, that is tough. Um, Honestly, I wouldn't stray away from what the MCU did. The MCU had two fantastic movies, and they focused on the high school drama of it. So we have Peter Parker in high school dealing with high school issues as an actual high schooler. He's not, I'm going through a little shade here, but he's not a 30-year-old actor who is blatantly um whatever. In the first Spider-Man movie, it was the best we had at the time in terms of superhero movies because there was nothing else essentially, with few exceptions. And so you had 30-plus-year-old actors playing high schoolers, and it showed. And all the drama was outside of high school. There was really nothing tying it into a Spider-Man story. Now, that being said, we have the high school story. So it'd be nice if he moved on to college or even gave us some more modern story elements. There are certain plot threads within the recent comics, I say recent as in, 10 years ago, that will be really interesting to tackle and take us in all new directions rather than replaying the same greatest hits. So, you got the Green Goblin storyline where he throws Peter Parker's love off a bridge. We've seen that twice now, possibly hinted at three times, I think. But that storyline has been done to death in the movies. We've already seen a few Venom, so definitely give us something new. I don't really have a good answer off the top of my head, but there are countless stories out there, and just seeing some of the better moments from the Spider-Man animated series adapted into the live action, I think that would go a long way. So yeah, thank you, Jordan, for coming in, and I'm glad you stopped by. Now, going back to the three questions I mentioned, the first one, does the live action One Piece need a reason to exist? On the surface, no. The manga is more than 1,000 episodes deep, and the anime is not that far behind. Both of those are stunning. I wouldn't skip ahead to where the anime is now, but this past week it did some of the hands down best animation I've ever seen. And the manga is, like I hinted at, sort of after 1,000 episodes in, they are starting to head towards the end game. So that has some incredible storytelling moments. The anime is just getting better and better and better. And so there is, on the surface, no real reason to remake or adapt any of those. Except the story itself has changed a lot since those humble roots. It's been 20, probably close to 30 years. I forget exactly when the original manga started up with the Romance Dawn of the first episode arc, but it had some points where it stumbled. And more than that, there were early moments which kind of conflict with later events. Ichiro Oda is brilliant in his world building and how he planted so many massive payoffs hundreds of chapters before details became relevant. And it all flowed completely naturally. And we can piece every tiny detail, certain background characters. We can, if you have a keen eye and you are very aware of Easter eggs, you can kind of understand where the story is going, or when they get to a new island and you see, oh, hey, here's that character and he's connected to the Straw Hats in this way because of this thing that he was doing, or this hat that he was wearing, or this mention of, well, I don't want to give away spoilers, but he mentioned something when they met him, 200 chapters ago, and now we see him on his island in his home, and he means this, that, and the other. So there are big bang moments where all these tiny little pieces have built up, and so all of a sudden we get this huge explosion, and now we're on an island, and we know how important it is if you've been paying attention. Even if you don't, he still sort of explains it, but it has so much more meaning to see some of those moments get hinted at with breadcrumbs and then eventually become these major arcs, or the catalyst for major arcs. that all flowed naturally in the manga, and there are moments that didn't. They didn't align that well, where the context has changed in the 20 plus years since the manga started. Like I mentioned, Luffy starting out was kind of an idiot. Now he's this powerhouse on a mission and he's got very, very clear goals. But at the start, he wanted to be king of the pirates with no clear, 3-step process of how to do it. So, step one, uh, he didn't even have a ship at the start. He basically just got in a little dinghy and then ran out of food and the dinghy was sinking. So he got into a barrel and then just floated out into sea. So, that origin to question marks to step three, King of the Pirates. There's a lot that he was not capable of doing at the beginning. And from a writing standpoint, there's a lot that you can't necessarily include or do as well as you would like when you have to have such a quick pace, because these stories were written on a weekly basis until Achiro Oda had enough prowess in the industry to take time off, or to now he's on a bi-weekly schedule after taking a significant time off because of health reasons. And I'm glad that he did. I'm glad they took the time off they needed to do it, because I don't want the person telling the story to hurt themselves in order to tell that story. But my point is that when you come out on a weekly basis, there are going to be those tiny mistakes that slip through the cracks. So the repeated speed led to errors in continuity or details that feel like they're a mess on the page. So my point is that the earlier moments could be a little bit more fleshed out, and the live action show did that. Better than that, a moment from hundreds of chapters later in the series was cut and pasted, adapted into this live action adaptation, and it worked. They didn't hide this familial conflict. And I'm not going to say more on that. As for the anime, when I was growing up, the show was shown on 4Kids TV. The problem is that 4Kids TV took drastic measures to alter the anime in terms of dubs and what was actually shown on screen. So specifically, the version that I saw changed the source material in baffling ways and in ways that made sense. So they changed how certain characters, the things that certain characters would say, how they would say them, how they would react. But it was also 4Kids TV, so there were moments that make sense to censor for children. Namely, Sanji the cook is a chain smoker, except in the 4Kids TV adaptation, they change it to him continually licking a lollipop. There's also there's also a character who's called Smoker, who has these giant cigars that he's always smoking, and he has a devil fruit power that turns him into gaseous smoke. Those cigars were edited out so that it was just kind of a smoke monster. And there was also a lot of filler within the anime, which is surprising given how much content the series already contained at that point. I know they were kind of building in a backlog because now they've essentially caught up to the manga. But it really is weird how having so much ground to cover, how much they added to an already bloated series. So to answer the question of does this live action version need to exist? Certainly. It fulfills a need in improving the story's roots. In most live action remakes of popular anime, the obvious goal is money. The end result of the live action Death Note, Full Metal Alchemist, and Dragon Ball Evolution were atrocious. Aside from the name recognition, they had little to do with the themes, characters, or even plots from the originals. In fact, I think Dragon Ball Evolution was such a bad cash grab that I don't think Justin Chatwin's career ever recovered. He was a lead actor. He looked like he was about to be the next Golden Boy in terms of that genre of acting, and then he played Goku in Dragon Ball Evolution, and things sort of seemed to stagnate from there. I know he did roles in a bunch of shows I don't really watch, like I think Weeds, and maybe he was in the Walter White show that I never got into, Breaking Bad. He might have been in that one, or like another equivalent of a show that is not really something I would watch. Anyways, he looked like he was about to break out. He got this role, and everything just sort of fizzled out more or less. So Before we write a reboot or remake, we should ask as writers, why are we creating this new twist on something old? The next question we should ask is how can we make the story our own? How can we be different but not completely new? What makes this One Piece version so good, the live action, when they already have two fantastic ones to compete with, that being the manga and the anime? As I mentioned, the manga tells such an incredible story, and the anime, for as bloated as it is, it now serves a very, very important purpose. And that is because the manga is trying to come in for a landing, it is very light on certain details. There was just a pretty big battle that the end result was basically sorry, the battle itself was basically skipped over. So we saw all the pieces coming together, and then we kind of just knew where it was going to go. So Ichiro Oda skipped to the end and is like, oh, hey, by the way, this is what happened. This is the fallout, and now we're moving on. And the anime is most likely going to take those skipped over moments and start fleshing them out in a way that gives us more context for everything that's going on. Or we finally get to see certain characters get those feel good moments of watching them just kick ass. That's the best way I can put it for what's likely coming ahead. But on top of that, the anime, as I mentioned, the anime is finishing up some incredible fight scenes right now, which is doing things that I can't imagine with art. I don't want to go into it too much, but essentially, where they are right now, they're at a point where they're breaking reality. And that is something I can't even imagine how to animate. And yet, it's being animated so incredibly well that I couldn't think of it being done any other way. So, because it's something we know delivered in a new way, that being the live action, that's where it can excel and where it can show us something new or a new twist on something old. As comparison and crudely put, Wicked is a play about the Wizard of Oz told from the witch's point of view, where a stranger comes in, murders the witch's sister, and steals her shoes. Again, that's crudely described. But Wicked still tells a new story and gives all new context to the classic tale, and actually a much happier ending, despite the fact that it's focusing on the Wicked Witch of the West that she's referred to in the Wizard of Oz. So by giving us something all new, it can tell a different story, a different side, give us different context for what is happening. And because of that, because Wicked did it so well, it's recognized as one of the best plays. Best, I don't know how to describe it other than that. Best Broadway shows. There we go. So this is where we as writers need to make the difficult call. The original work still works. Sorry, the original work still exists. And so we have to say, how can we do something different? Or even, can we do something different enough to warrant us writing it? One work needs to, or our work needs to carry the tone, the feel, the emotions, the nostalgia of the original, while still taking it in a slightly different route, so that's not a beat by beat repeat of what's already been done. Otherwise, there isn't necessarily a reason for it to exist. Stray too far, and readers will vocally share their negative opinions. But don't go far enough, and readers will ask, well, why bother? Looking at the live action remake, should it be retold, and does it stray just far enough to tell its own story? Absolutely. The adaptation created a much more interconnected world than the manga or the anime. In both, the pirate threats were basically, at least early on, they were villain threats of the week. There is a series of Luffy and his crew taking on progressively more powerful enemies, but those enemies had relatively nothing in common until they eventually team up later on. Whereas later in the series, you have one domino that leads to a slightly bigger domino that's, slightly bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to these big, massive threats that you were trying to take on from the beginning, but you can see all the little domino pieces falling down. Early on, like I mentioned, the arc that gets covered in season 1 of the live action adaptation, all of these little fish, sure, they are progressively getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more powerful, but all of them are working together, or at least they all know each other. So there's the one big bad for the season who is getting tribute from the other pirates in the area, and they're all terrified of that one pirate, the big bad. So much so that that one pirate shows up and, well, things get fun. I'll say that. Because quite literally, there are always bigger fish in the sea. But I'm sorry, that's a joke if you understand who the big bad is. But anyways, in the manga, a warlord of the sea is a somewhat has a somewhat contrived reason for appearing when he does because of, direct intent, and the live action version fixes that moment where he is directly unleashed like a dog by the government to do a specific action. And so that puts him into the story. Whereas it's kind of slightly happenstance that the series of events that led to that warlord being there, it felt a little bit more contrived. And then here in the show, there is a specific reason for him. So it feels like the plot happens because of the actions of the characters, which is already slightly different, but it is still the same end result, which is already a great start for the live action. Events happened out of order, where an encounter and major reveal in the manga, again, took hundreds of episodes and chapters to get to and resolve. But this show threw that event out early and then throughout that event detail early on, and then gave it a satisfactory resolution by the end of the series, which aligned and strengthened the season's themes. We also got new content for characters that weren't prevalent in the manga or anime for the most part. We're seeing something new. Their focus within the manga and anime is primarily the Straw Hat crew, with a couple of maybe smaller moments or highlights within the cover art or tiny moments within the anime that are basically blink and you miss it. But in the show, we see those side characters get more, that they then grow more and more as the season progresses, who we don't really see those events until they become relevant much, much later. And amazingly, this doesn't detract from the story that's being told, even though we are technically getting less with the pirates. And hey, Felicia, thank you for joining in. I'm really honored that you're here on a Monday night. So let me know if you are a fan of One Piece at all. Actually, anybody in the comments, if you like the show, let me know if you watched it. If you have watched the other versions, just give a shout out in the comments, or whether you plan to by following after I am sitting here praising it for what will likely be a half an hour. I am doing great. This Monday I thought was going to be a lot rougher than it was, but it turns out a mistake I thought I made on Friday was not actually a mistake. So I'm doing great today. Oh, One Piece. Well, Never Too Late is now on Netflix, and hopefully by the end of this episode, I will convince you to check it out. Now, is all of that in the show, where it is still same enough, but it is slightly different? And yes, all I can say is look no further than the actors. The actor playing Luffy is Inyaku Godoy. He's energetic and feels like he is on an adventure. There's still moments where he provides the emotional depth, which wasn't present in the manga or anime. And as I mentioned, honestly, early Luffy was an idiot in the manga and anime, whereas in the show, the actor was able to convey intelligence from somebody who is, again, a really goofy character. He has the ability to essentially stretch, and he is the rubber man. So he has a move where he like winds his arm all the way back and it goes back, 50, 100 feet, and then he punches it forward and he calls out his moves and he's just having fun. Both the actor and Monkey D. Luffy in the show, they both are just having so much fun that it is infectious when you're watching it. And in the manga, the character Monkey D. Luffy made everything up as he went, and it showed. He doesn't even act like a captain until, not going to spoil it, but there is a certain moment where they are forced to have somebody take responsibility for the actions of the crew. And that moment is, I guess, really one of the highlights of the entire series. I'm not going to say anything about it, but it leads to Nope, not going to say anything about it. Yeah, yeah. There's no way I can say anything. Well, I will say this. That moment that gets very emotional is one of the highlights of the series, and it follows after they cut a wave with a sword. So I'm sure that happens a bunch of times. So that I mean that does actually happen a bunch of times. But they are on a train and they cut a wave with a sword. So if you see that coming, know that it's about to get very very emotional. And that's all I say. Before that, the other members of the crew were the ones calling shots, especially their navigator Nami, meaning that Monkey D. Luffy in the anime and manga was captain in name only. Whereas in the show, it is sort of a collaboration and they do take some time to come together, but it is still Monkey D. Luffy making the decisions. And he is already acting like a captain. Whereas, so the live action gives us something new. On top of that, the actor who played Sanji, Taz Skylar, became the production crew's cook in real life. He comes in the later half of the season one, but he makes such a massive impact. He is smiling and charismatic and makes every scene he's in. He gives more to the character than there originally was in this part of the arc that they're adapting. So the casting is so good that I can only assume the actress playing Nami, Emily Rudd, was stealing props throughout the entire shooting. We're talking early MCU levels of the cast embodying the characters they're portraying. The actor who played Buggy the Clown was spot on and sarcastic and a dangerous goofball. He showed a sadistic streak, and I can imagine this character going on the full journey that Buggy does. In fact, if you are a fan of Agents of Shield, the guy who played Deck in the later seasons, that's who plays Buggy the Clown. So the set pieces are believable. There's a huge amount of the budget was spent on creating the floating restaurant called the Bratier, and it looked stunning. So much so that I want it to be a real place that I can eat at. And I'm sure in Japan there has to be a Bratier somewhere out there for us to take a boat trip out to and then eat at. But I really would like to visit that place or this version of it because I'm sure the version of the show looked much better than any real life could ever produce. And I know it's not necessarily writing, so it's a slight tangent, but the music in the show was stunning, especially for a television show, even outside of that. But each character had their own theme, and when they're in sync, those themes musically blended together to become the season theme musically. And those themes blended together. And when they aren't in sync, then they're sort of clashing together musically and on screen. And those actors are everything comes together in a way that makes this show incredible. I am very big on music for video games and setting mood, and this show does it really well. So when there's a final fight between Luffy and the big bad, and they both have their own distinct musical themes that clashed while they were physically fighting in the show. I don't have enough time to fully break this down, and it's largely extraneous to tonight's topic, but I do want to mention that the music tells its own story. So season 1 adapted the first 100 or so chapters of the manga are about 45 episodes of the anime, 45 episodes of 22-minute episodes each, into a bite-sized 8-episode, hour-long each complete arc for season 1. This portrayed the first major conflict and includes certain specific famous shots from both the anime and manga. It's really cool. I looked up a comparison, and yeah, there are certain scenes, certain moments, certain things that they had to get absolutely spot on, and they 100% delivered. The show hit the plot points and emotional peaks reasonably well, and I'll end with the negatives on a minute because there are a few. I don't want to be full on praise. But above all else, the show is fun. I laughed at the humor and the acting, and Buggy the Clown, like I mentioned, he is a really bad clown, but he was still funny in every scene for the most part. And the manga is all about the comedic beats, and through though different, the actors portraying similar circumstances delivered. All I can say is whether or not you're a fan of One Piece, go out and watch it. And yes, I'm so glad, Felicia, I convinced you to add it to your list. It's for fans who didn't consume the best version of the early content, like me, or forgot most of it in the 20 plus years since. So, One Piece is a story of camaraderie, hardship, humor, and above all else, absolute freedom. Go watch it and let me know what you think. Do you think I'm overhyping it? Maybe. Am I a diehard fan? I don't really think so. I enjoy it and I do consume it in a lot of different mediums. But I do say, does the show deliver in every single aspect? I say yes. 5 out of 5 stars. The story, the characters, the setting made the static manga come to life in ways that are different than the anime. And each of the three mediums hold up on their own merits and enhance each other. So, well, since Felicia's here, I was going to give some slight spoilers, but we're already over at 36 minutes. So I guess I can kind of skip it. Let's see here. Yeah, so it's not all praise. The show was very tight on budget and it shows. As I mentioned, Luffy's signature moves are to stretch all the way back and then punch forward. And a lot of those scenes where he's fighting are kind of darker lit. So it'll be taking place at night, it'll be in rooms without lighting. And that is a now I'm aware of because of thanks to Game of Thrones and a couple of other shows, that is a shortcut to spending less money on CGI. And my hope, what everything looks like, is that there will be a season 2, and I hope the season 2 gets more episodes and more budget to really showcase what they can do. So the final fight scene, it felt like it was cut short. There was a whole character who wasn't included in that from the manga and the anime. He was an octopus who wielded swords, which is really cool, but that's not in the final fight. And it makes sense. Again, that would have been really expensive to do, but it did leave the final fight a little bit underwhelming, or rather, very, very shorter than I was expecting. That being said, there was an earlier fight inside of a mansion that was spooky and delivered in every aspect for how well it went. Now, this isn't really a spoiler. Well, whatever. There is a final scene in the show, season 1, that is taken right from the manga. And when it happened, when the crew came together for that specific moment, it's in the final moments of the show. I got goosebumps because that is something that I remember watching in the anime, that I read in the manga. And it is definitely a lesser moment compared to the really emotional moment where they decide to take on the big bad. But like I said, that moment at the end of the show gave me goosebumps because it felt like the actors were just declaring that they were going to come back for season 2 because we need to go forward with this. And they all look like they were just having so much fun in that scene that I got caught up in the moment. I'm just sitting there smiling and laughing along with them. Now, apparently season 2 has been drafted. That's what I've heard. That's a rumor. So filming can commence once the strike ends. And I really want them to get a third and maybe fourth season. What I would like to see is season 1 is 8 episodes. Maybe we get 12 episodes for season 2 and we get more money for those. Because that way we could get Logetown, we could get Chopper, we could start Alabasta, and maybe do season 3 would be the entire Alabasta arc. Now, taking a look at how not to adapt to work, I'll give a slight spoiler for another of the upcoming script in the book episodes, where we're going to be talking on the Vixen and Fictions channel about the film and TV adaptations of book 2 and season 2 of The Wheel of Time. Right now, I'm 4 episodes deep into that show, and I'm not enthusiastic about how they're adapting the book. I'll go into more details in January when we do the full breakdown, but the plot and the characters just happen, and the motivations are all over the place between episodes. There are several emotional character developments built from season 1 of The Wheel of Time, that are forgotten in this season as characters just regress. I only mention that here because the Netflix show is, I would argue, one of the best modern adaptations I've seen. And then I went to watching One Piece and I was just like, meh, well, this is, it's here. I have a bike right here that I work out on. So I pop in the Wheel of Time. I got my little Kindle thing and I just watch it while I ride the bike. So, it's all good. But it's something that kind of occupies my time. Whereas I definitely wouldn't do that with One Piece. I am going to sit there and enjoy and savor every moment of it. So I'm closing out now, and those are my thoughts on writing reboots. That pales, I gave three tips for how to do it and how to do it well, and I gave as many examples as I could from One Piece as I cared to without spoiling it. But that pales in comparison to my main point of this episode. Set sail in the golden age of piracy and watch the Straw Hat crew as they come together. Go out now, start watching Netflix, One Piece. When you're done, rate it, do whatever. I really hope you enjoy it. If you do, come back here, say you saw it, say, Ben, shut up. You're overhyping this show. It's not that great. It's just kind of there. Or Ben, you're absolutely right. Everything you said is correct. And I can't wait to start reading the manga and find out where they're going. And, I'll see you in 30 years when I actually finish reading it. But with all that said, I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me on a random tangent for Running to Write, where I normally give questionable writing advice through Running at Fours, but tonight I just wanted to gush about the live action One Piece. So I do a newsletter and social media things. There's links in the show notes. Do whatever you want, but see you next time. Until then, I cannot iterate this enough. Watch the live action One Piece on Netflix.